The two Romes. What happened when the empire split? In the year 395 AD, Roman Emperor Theodosius I died, and his decision changed history forever. He divided the Roman Empire between his two sons. Arcadius received the east, with his capital at Constantinople. Honorius received the west, ruling from Rome and later Ravenna. Two halves of one empire, two capitals, two Romes. Fast forward 600 years, to the year 1000 AD, and stand first in Rome, then in Constantinople. The contrast is staggering. Rome, the eternal city, capital of the empire that conquered the known world, has collapsed to a population of barely 30,000 people. The Forum is a cow pasture. The aqueducts are broken. Marble palaces have become quarries. Pope and local noble families fight for control over a city that is a shadow of its former glory. Constantinople, the new Rome, built by Constantine, is the largest, wealthiest, most powerful city in Christendom. 500,000 people live here. The imperial palace still functions. The Hagia Sophia's dome dominates the skyline. The emperor commands armies and controls trade routes from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. This is the story of what happened when the empire split, how one Rome died while the other became the greatest city in the medieval world. The split and the setup. To understand the fate of the two Romes, we must first understand the division. When Theodosius I died in 395 AD, the Roman Empire was already under severe pressure. Barbarian tribes pressed on the frontiers. Economic strain weakened the state. Administrative complexity made governing the vast territory increasingly difficult. Theodosius's decision to divide the empire between his sons formalized a split that had been developing for decades. The Western Roman Empire, with its capital at Rome, later moved to Ravenna for defensive reasons, controlled Italy, Gaul, Hispania, Britain, and North Africa. It inherited the heartland of the original Roman Republic, but faced immediate military and economic challenges. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital at Constantinople, controlled Greece, Asia Minor, the Levant, and Egypt. It inherited the wealthier, more urbanized, more economically productive provinces, the old Hellenistic kingdoms conquered by Rome centuries earlier. This division was initially intended as an administrative convenience, not a permanent split. The empire was still considered one political entity with two co-emperors, but circumstances would pull them apart. The Western Roman Empire collapsed within 81 years. In 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The Western Empire ceased to exist as a political entity. The Eastern Roman Empire, which historians now call the Byzantine Empire, though its inhabitants always called themselves Romans, survived for another 977 years, until Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 AD. By the year 1000 AD, the divergence was complete. Rome and Constantinople represented two utterly different worlds, though both claimed the legacy of Rome. Rome in 1000 AD, the fallen capital Rome in 1000 AD, was a medieval city haunted by imperial ruins. The population had collapsed from perhaps 1 million at the empire's peak to approximately 30,000 to 35,000 people. This dramatic decline resulted from repeated sackings by barbarian armies in the 5th century, the Gothic War that devastated Italy, the Lombard invasion, and the breakdown of the urban infrastructure that had sustained the ancient city. The urban landscape was dominated by decay. The Forum Romanum, once the political and commercial heart of the empire, was called the Campo Vicino in medieval times because cattle grazed among the ruins. The ground level had risen several meters due to centuries of debris, flooding, and collapse, burying ancient structures up to their columns. The aqueducts that had brought fresh water from miles away had been cut during the Gothic sieges of the 6th century and never fully repaired. Most of the population drew water from the Tiber, wells, or the few remaining functioning fountain systems. The population clustered in the Campus Martius, the bend of the Tiber River, leaving large sections of the city within the Aurelian walls abandoned or converted to farmland and vineyards. The Palatine Hill, where emperors had built their palaces, was now dominated by fortified towers belonging to rival Roman noble families. The Colosseum was a fortified stronghold controlled by the Frangipane family. The theater of Marcellus had been converted into a fortress. Ancient temples had been consecrated as Christian churches or stripped for building materials. Political authority was fragmented. The Pope theoretically ruled Rome, but real power belonged to competing noble families, the Crescenti, the Tusculani, the Counts of Tusculum, who controlled fortified towers, owned land, and fought each other for control of the papacy itself. The period from 904 to 964 D is known as the Saeculum Obscurum or Pornocracy, when the papacy was dominated by powerful Roman aristocratic families, and popes were installed and deposed based on political intrigue rather than spiritual merit. Architecture was modest. New construction was primarily churches, built using stone and brick scavenged from Roman ruins. Residential buildings were simple timber or brick structures, often built against or inside the walls of ancient Roman buildings. The economy was local and agricultural. Rome produced little and imported less. Pilgrims visiting the tombs of Saints Peter and Paul brought some revenue, but Rome was no longer a center of trade or manufacturing. It was a provincial town living in the ruins of greatness. Constantinople in 1000 AD. The thriving capital Constantinople in 1000 AD was a completely different reality. The city, founded by Constantine in 330 AD on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, had become the largest and wealthiest city in Christendom. Population estimates range from 300,000 to 500,000 inhabitants, 10 to 15 times larger than Rome. The city occupied a triangular peninsula where the Bosphorus Strait meets the Sea of Marmara. The Golden Horn, a deep natural harbor on the northern side, could shelter hundreds of ships. This strategic location made Constantinople the crossroads of trade between Europe and Asia, controlling the sea routes between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. The Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century, protected the landward approaches to the city. This triple defensive system, moat, outer wall, and massive inner wall, with 96 towers, had never been breached by a foreign enemy, and would not be until 1204 AD. The walls ran approximately 6.5 kilometers from the Golden Horn to the Sea of Marmara. Inside the walls, Constantinople was a functioning imperial capital. The Great Palace complex stretched from the Hippodrome to the Sea of Marmara, housing the emperor, his court, administration, and treasure. The palace was not a single building, but a vast compound of halls, chapels, residential quarters, gardens, and administrative buildings accumulated over centuries. Hagia Sophia, the Cathedral of Holy Wisdom, dominated the skyline. Built by Emperor Justinian I and completed in 537 AD, it remained the largest church in Christendom in 1000 AD. Its central dome rose 182 feet above the floor, appearing to float on light from the 40 windows around its base. The interior was covered in gold mosaics depicting Christ, the Virgin Mary, saints, and emperors. This was not a ruin, it was a living, functioning, magnificent building. The Hippodrome could hold 100,000 spectators for chariot races, which were not mere entertainment, but political events where the population, divided into rival factions called the Blues and Greens, expressed support or opposition to imperial policies. The Mise, the main avenue, ran from the Million, the 0-mile marker, westward through the city to the Theodosian walls. It was a wide, colonnaded street lined with shops, workshops, and arcades. Markets and forums opened off the Mise at intervals. Constantinople had functioning infrastructure that Rome had lost centuries earlier. Aqueducts brought fresh water from sources over 20 kilometers away. The Valens Aqueduct, built in the 4th century, still functioned in 1000 AD. Water flowed into massive underground cisterns. The Basilica cistern could hold 80,000 cubic meters and was distributed through ceramic pipes to public fountains, baths, and wealthy private homes. The city was lit at night. Public spaces, especially near the Great Palace and major churches, had torches and hanging lamps, something almost unknown in Western European cities. The social structures of the two cities reflected their divergent fates. In Rome, society was feudal and fragmented. The Pope held spiritual authority, but limited temporal power. Noble families, military strongmen controlling towers and land competed for dominance. The merchant class was small and weak. Most of the population consisted of peasants, laborers, and the urban poor, living at subsistence level. Literacy was rare in Rome, confined to clergy and a handful of scribes. Education had collapsed with the Roman state. The intellectual life that had once flourished was gone. In Constantinople, society was stratified but functioning. At the apex stood the emperor in 1000 AD. This was Basil II, known as Basil the Bulgar Slayer, who ruled from 976 to 1025 AD. He was arguably the most powerful ruler in Christendom, commanding professional armies, controlling vast territories, and wielding both temporal and spiritual influence. Below the emperor was the imperial aristocracy families who held military commands, governed provinces, and staffed the imperial bureaucracy. Constantinople had a sophisticated civil service with specialized bureau handling different aspects of administration, finance, military affairs, foreign relations, justice, and ceremonies. The middle ranks included merchants, guild masters, and wealthy craftsmen. Constantinople's economy was highly organized, with professional guilds controlling different trades. The economy operated on a money-based system using the gold nomisma, which had maintained its weight and purity for centuries and was the international currency of the medieval Mediterranean. Literacy rates, while not universal, were higher than anywhere in Western Europe. The University of Constantinople continued to function, teaching rhetoric, philosophy, law, and theology. Monasteries operated scriptoria where monks copied manuscripts, preserving classical and Christian texts. Daily life in the two cities could not have been more different. In Rome, most people lived in timber or simple brick buildings, sleeping on straw mattresses, cooking over open hearths. Water came from wells or the Tiber. Sanitation was primitive. Waste was dumped in streets or pits. Disease was rampant. Food was basic. Bread made from barley or rye, pottage, vegetables, and occasionally fish or salted meat. Wine was common but quality varied. Only the wealthy ate well white bread, roasted meats, game, and imported delicacies. Work was manual and agricultural. Farming occupied most people outside the walls. Inside, craftsmen worked at basic trades, serving local needs. There was little specialized production or trade. Entertainment was limited to religious festivals, church processions, and occasional violence feuds between noble families. In Constantinople, daily life reflected urban sophistication. The middle and upper classes lived in multi-story buildings, with marble floors, mosaics, and sometimes running water. Public fountains stood throughout the city, providing clean water. Public baths operated, continuing Roman bathing traditions. Cold, warm, and hot rooms, followed by massage. Food was varied and abundant. Markets sold produce from across the empire and beyond: fruits, vegetables, grains, fish, meats, spices. Bakeries produced different grades of bread. Restaurants and taverns served prepared meals. Wine, both local and imported, was available at various price points. Specialized craftsmen produced high-quality goods. Silk workshops employed thousands of workers producing Byzantine silk, famous throughout Europe. Goldsmiths created intricate jewelry and religious objects. Ivory carvers, manuscript illuminators, and enamel workers produced luxury items for export and the court. Entertainment included the hippodrome races, major events, drawing tens of thousands of spectators. Theater performances, religious festivals with elaborate processions, and private gatherings where poetry, music, and philosophical discussion occurred. The economic contrast between the two cities was perhaps the starkest indicator of their divergent fates. Rome's economy in 1000 AD was local and stagnant. The city produced little of value. Agriculture in the surrounding countryside provided grain, wine, and vegetables for local consumption. Small-scale crafts produced basic goods. The only significant economic activity was pilgrimage. Thousands of Christian pilgrims visited Rome annually to see the tombs of Saints Peter and Paul, bringing revenue to innkeepers, guides, and vendors of religious souvenirs. Trade was minimal. Rome was no longer connected to significant commercial networks. The roads that had once connected it to the empire were dangerous, poorly maintained, and controlled by bandits. The port of Ostia had silted up and was malarial and largely abandoned. Constantinople's economy in 1000 AD was vast and sophisticated. The city was the center of a trade network, spanning from England to China. Ships from the Black Sea brought grain, fish, furs, slaves, and amber. From Russia and the steppes, caravans from the east brought silk, spices, gems, and porcelain. From Persia, India, and China, Mediterranean merchants brought wine, olive oil, and manufactured goods. From Italy, Greece, and Syria, Constantinople itself manufactured high-value goods. Silk production was a major industry, with imperial workshops producing silk for the court and export. The city was famous for goldsmithing, ivory carving, manuscript illumination, and enamel work. The imperial government collected substantial tax revenues through customs duties on trade passing through Constantinople. This revenue supported the military, bureaucracy, and the emperor's ability to commission monumental building projects and patronize the arts. The contrast was clear. Rome survived on subsistence agriculture and pilgrimage donations. Constantinople thrived on international trade and sophisticated manufacturing. Political authority in Rome was fragmented and weak. The Pope was the titular ruler, but real power belonged to competing noble families, who controlled fortified towers and private armies. Popes were often installed or deposed through violence, bribery, or family connections, rather than spiritual merit. In 1000 AD, Pope Sylvester II held office, but his authority was constantly challenged by Roman aristocratic factions. The Holy Roman Emperor Otto III attempted to assert imperial control over Rome, but faced resistance from local nobles. Justice was arbitrary and violent. Blood feuds between families could last generations. The concept of a monopoly on legitimate violence held by a central state did not exist in Rome. Constantinople was governed by an autocracy centered on the emperor. Basil II, ruling in 1000 AD, was an absolute monarch, theoretically answerable only to God. All power, in theory, flowed from him. But Byzantine governance was sophisticated. The empire was divided into military administrative provinces called themes, each governed by a strategos who commanded local troops and collected taxes. The central government in Constantinople included numerous specialized bureaus. Court ceremonial was extraordinarily elaborate, reinforcing imperial authority through ritual. When the emperor appeared in public, processions followed strict protocols, with officials arranged by rank. The legal system was based on Roman law, codified in Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis. Courts operated throughout the empire, administering justice according to written law codes rather than arbitrary noble power. The contrast was absolute. Rome had descended into feudal chaos. Constantinople maintained centralized imperial governance, continuing the Roman tradition. Both cities were Christian, but their religious identities diverged significantly. Rome was the seat of the Pope, spiritual leader of Western Christianity. The Church was the only institution in Rome that retained organizational continuity with the Roman past. However, the papacy in 1000 AD was deeply corrupted by political interference from Roman noble families. The liturgy was celebrated in Latin according to the Roman Rite. Church services were the center of communal life. Mass, processions, saints' feast days, and religious festivals structured the calendar. Monasticism was spreading. Benedictine monasteries followed the rule of Saint Benedict, preserving literacy and learning in an era when secular education had vanished in the West. Constantinople was the center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. The Patriarch of Constantinople held spiritual authority, but the emperor wielded significant power over church affairs, a system called Caesaropapism. The liturgy, the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, was celebrated in Greek, not Latin. Services were highly ceremonial, involving incense, chanting, elaborate vestments, and strict ritual. The theological relationship between Rome and Constantinople was deteriorating. Disputes over doctrine, the Filioque clause, papal authority, clerical celibacy, and liturgical practices created tension. The Great Schism of 1054 AD, which would formally split Christianity into Catholic and Orthodox branches, was only 54 years away. Militarily, the two cities occupied completely different positions. Rome in 1000 AD had no significant military force. The city relied on its walls, the Aurelian walls, built in the 3rd century. It depended on the Holy Roman Emperor or local strongmen for defense. Rome was not projecting power. It was trying to avoid being conquered. Constantinople commanded one of the most powerful military forces in the medieval world. The Byzantine army in 1000 AD under Basil II was professional, well-equipped, and experienced. The army consisted of the tagmata, imperial guard units stationed in and around Constantinople, and thematic troops, provincial armies. Foreign mercenaries, including the famous Varangian Guard, served as the emperor's personal bodyguards. Byzantine soldiers wore lamellar armor or mail, fought as cavalry with composite bows and lances, and used sophisticated tactics. The Byzantine navy controlled the sea, equipped with Greek fire, an incendiary weapon devastating in naval warfare. Under Basil II, the Byzantine Empire was expanding. He campaigned successfully against the Bulgarian Empire, earning his nickname Bulgar Slayer. He stabilized the eastern frontier and reconquered territories. Rome survived by being irrelevant. Constantinople thrived through military strength. The comparison is stark. In 1000 AD, 600 years after the empire split, Rome, 30,000 people, broken aqueducts, ruined forum, pope and nobles fighting for control, subsistence economy, illiteracy, dependence on pilgrimage revenue. Constantinople, 400,000 people, functioning infrastructure, magnificent Hagia Sophia, powerful emperor, international trade, literacy, military dominance. What caused this divergence? Geography played a role. Constantinople's location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia made it a natural trade hub. The eastern provinces were wealthier and more urbanized. Economic factors mattered. The east controlled Egypt's grain, Anatolia's agricultural wealth, and lucrative trade routes. The west lost North Africa to the Vandals and faced economic collapse. Military pressure differed. The west faced sustained barbarian invasions. The east faced threats too, but its superior wealth allowed it to pay off enemies or hire barbarian mercenaries. Cultural continuity was critical. The East maintained Greek language, Hellenistic culture, and Roman political traditions uninterrupted. The West experienced cultural rupture. Latin literacy declined, Roman law fragmented, urban life collapsed. Institutional resilience mattered most. The Byzantine Empire maintained a functioning bureaucracy, professional military, tax system, and legal framework. The Western Empire's institutions collapsed, replaced by feudal fragmentation. Standing in Rome in 1000 AD, among the ruins and cow pastures of the Forum, it would have been difficult to imagine that this had once been the capital of an empire. Standing in Constantinople in 1000 AD, beneath the golden dome of Hagia Sophia, watching imperial processions and foreign merchants from a dozen nations, it would have seemed impossible that this city would ever fall. Yet history held more reversals. Constantinople would fall to Crusaders in 1204 AD, recover, then fall finally to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 AD. Rome would experience a renaissance, become the center of Catholic Christendom, and eventually the capital of a unified Italy. But in 1000 AD, the divergence was absolute. The two Romes, one dying, one thriving, showed what happens when empires divide. Geography, economics, military strength, and institutional continuity determined which half would survive. The Western Roman Empire's collapse was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow decay over centuries, leaving Rome a ghost city haunted by its past. The Eastern Roman Empire's survival as Byzantium was not inevitable, but the result of strategic advantages and institutional resilience. The empire split in 395 AD. By 1000 AD, the divergence was complete. One Rome remembered greatness, the other lived it. Two capitals, two Romes, two utterly different destinies, shaped by the consequences of that ancient division.